Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive.
Yes, welcome back.
So if you're tuning in today, there's a good chance you're either prepping for the UPSC International Relations paper,
Hmm.
or maybe you're just someone who likes to stay informed about what's shaping the world.
Absolutely.
Well, either way, you're in the right place. Because today, we are going to take a deep dive into a topic that is honestly having a huge impact on global affairs.
Yeah, it really is.
We're talking about the resurgence of religion in the political sphere.
It's fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. And, it's one of those things that a lot of analysts and experts kind of didn't see coming.
Right?
For decades, the prevailing thought was that as the world modernized,
Yeah, as societies became more secular,
exactly, that religion would gradually kind of fade into the background.
become more of a private matter.
Yeah, a personal thing rather than a public source.
Right.
But what we're seeing now is pretty much the opposite of
It's
that.
really a remarkable shift.
It really is.
Yeah.
And so for today's deep dive, we're going to be looking at some excerpts
Yeah.
from
Some really thought-provoking pieces.
that explore this very topic,
Mm-hmm.
this resurgence of religion and how it's playing out on the world stage.
And I think what's really interesting is that it's not just one type of religion. It's
Yeah.
across the board.
It's a global phenomenon.
It is.
So the big question we're grappling with today is this.
Okay.
Is religion actually becoming more influential in politics?
Hmm.
And if so, how is that happening and why now?
Yeah. What are the driving forces behind this resurgence?
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So let's start by addressing the elephant in the room. This whole idea of the secularization thesis.
Right.
That, reason and science would kind of take over.
And religion would decline.
Exactly.
It's funny how that's been completely flipped on its head.
It really has.
Oh, no.
So can you talk a little bit about that? Like, what is the secularization thesis and why are we seeing it kind of fall apart?
Sure. So the secularization thesis basically argued that as societies modernized, they would become less religious. The idea was that scientific progress, education,
Yeah.
all those things would lead people to embrace reason.
Rationality.
Exactly. And religion would become less important in public life.
Kind of like relegated to the private sphere.
Yeah, and it made sense at the time, right?
Right.
I mean, we saw this trend in many Western countries.
Mm-hmm.
But what we're seeing now is that it's not such a straightforward story.
No, it's not.
And what's particularly interesting is that this resurgence is happening in many different forms.
Oh, absolutely.
It's not just about traditional religions becoming more powerful.
It's like religion is adapting
Yes,
to the modern world.
absolutely. We're seeing the rise of new religious movements,
Wow.
new forms of spirituality.
Hybrid faiths.
Exactly.
Even secular ideologies are adopting kind of this religious-like fervor.
Yeah, it's like people are searching for something to believe in something to give them a sense of meaning and purpose.
Yeah. And in a world that's increasingly uncertain
Yeah.
and chaotic.
That makes a lot of sense, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah.
So let's dig into that a little bit. Like, what is driving this resurgence?
Okay.
Is it just a backlash against globalization?
I think it's more complex than that.
I think so too.
I think one factor, and this is particularly relevant for our UPSC folks, is the way globalization
Yeah.
and rapid technological advancements have created this sense of anxiety and uncertainty in the world.
Right. People are feeling unmoored.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Traditional values are being challenged. Economic structures are shifting.
Yeah, everything feels kind of in flux.
And people are looking for something solid to hold on to.
Something familiar.
Something to ground them.
In religion with its, rituals and moral codes and sense of community,
Right. It offers that stability.
it can provide that anchor.
Exactly.
It's like a framework for understanding a world that can feel very chaotic and unpredictable.
And this search for stability and meaning, it's not just happening on an individual level.
No, it's not.
It's influencing political movements
Yeah.
and shaping the global landscape.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And, the excerpts that we're looking at today, they highlight just how diverse these manifestations of this resurgence are.
It's really quite remarkable.
It is.
Mhm.
In some cases, it's fueling this resurgence of social conservatism.
Right.
With people wanting to reassert those traditional religious values in the public sphere.
Yes, we see this in debates around abortion, same-sex marriage, religious education.
Exactly, those hot button issues.
And it's interesting because it's not just about personal beliefs.
Right.
It's about trying to shape laws and policies.
It's about power.
Yeah.
And influence.
Absolutely.
In other cases, this resurgence is contributing to the rise of religious nationalism.
Yes, where faith becomes intertwined with national identity.
and political aspirations.
Exactly, like we see with the growing influence of Hindu nationalism in India,
Huh.
or the role of evangelical Christianity in American politics.
Right, and these movements are often driven by a sense that traditional religious values are under attack.
And need to be defended.
Exactly. So it's about more than just personal faith.
Yes.
It's about using religion as a tool
A tool to shape the political landscape.
to gain power and influence.
And it raises some really complex questions about the relationship between faith and governance.
Yeah, and how those dynamics are playing out on a global scale.
Particularly in the context of international relations.
Okay, so this is where things get really interesting, especially for our UPSC audience.
Yeah, this is important stuff.
Because how do we make sense of this resurgence on a global scale?
How do we analyze it?
How does it impact international relations?
How do we even begin to understand it?
Yeah, it's a big question. So let's start with a concrete example.
Okay.
The Islamic Revolution in Iran in 1979.
A pivotal moment in history.
It really was.
It showed the world the power of religion to reshape a nation's political system.
And its role on the world stage.
Iran became the world's first Islamic republic,
A theocracy.
where religious leaders hold ultimate authority.
And that sent shockwaves through the international system.
It challenged the existing world order.
Suddenly you had this major player on the global stage operating from a completely different set of principles.
Than the predominantly secular West.
Right. It challenged traditional notions of diplomacy, international law, the balance of power.
It forced the world to rethink its assumptions about how nations interact.
Exactly. And Iran's example really highlights a key challenge for international relations in a world where religion is playing an increasingly important role in politics.
How do you engage with states whose political systems are based on religious doctrines?
Whose foreign policy is shaped by theological interpretations.
It's uncharted territory in many ways.
It requires a new level of understanding.
And a willingness to engage with worldviews that may be very different from our own.
Yeah, it's like adding this whole new dimension to this already complex chessboard of global politics.
And it's not just Iran.
No, it's not.
We're seeing the influence of religion play out in various ways around the world.
Like with the rise of religious nationalism.
Yes, which can be a powerful force for mobilizing people and shaping political agendas,
But it can also lead to tensions and conflicts.
both within and between states,
Exactly. Think about the ongoing tensions between India and Pakistan.
where religious identities are deeply intertwined with national narratives.
And political ambitions.
It's a reminder that religion can be both a unifying and a divisive force,
It can inspire compassion and solidarity.
but it can also be used to justify exclusion and violence.
And understanding these complexities is crucial for anyone studying international relations.
Especially for those preparing for the UPSC.
Absolutely.
And what's also fascinating is that this isn't just about the resurgence of established religions.
Right.
We're also seeing the emergence of new spiritual movements.
New forms of religious expression.
These new movements are often less hierarchical, more individualistic.
And more adaptable to the fluidity of modern life.
Exactly. We see this in the rise of New Age spirituality.
The growing interest in Eastern religions and practices.
And the emergence of online spiritual communities.
Right, it's like the religious landscape is constantly evolving.
And we need to be attuned to these shifts if we want to understand their impact on global politics.
Absolutely. And speaking of impact, the text we're looking at today highlights 3 distinct ways in which religion is being used as a political tool.
Yeah, it's not just about abstract ideas or theological debates.
It's about concrete actions.
Policy decisions.
Right. It's about real-world consequences.
The text mentions social conservatism, ethnic nationalism, and theocratic politics.
As the 3 main ways in which religion is being leveraged for political ends.
So let's unpack those a bit further.
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah.
So first up, social conservatism.
Right.
What exactly do they mean by that in this context?
So in this context, social conservatism refers to using religious arguments and values to advocate for traditional social norms and to oppose what are seen as liberal or progressive social changes.
So basically using religious beliefs to push back against changes in society.
Exactly. Like the debates around abortion, same-sex marriage, sex education.
Right. Often those who oppose those things on religious grounds are engaging in social conservatism.
Right. It's about using their beliefs to try and shape the moral and legal landscape of a society.
Okay, so it's not just about personal beliefs. It's about influencing the public sphere.
Absolutely. And this isn't just happening in the West.
Right. It's a global trend.
It is. We see similar trends in many parts of the world where conservative religious groups are pushing back against what they see as a threat to their values.
To their way of life.
Exactly, to traditional values and family structures.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, what about ethnic nationalism?
All right, so ethnic nationalism.
We've touched on this a bit already.
Yes.
But can you elaborate on how it's being used as a political tool?
Sure. So ethnic nationalism essentially merges religious identity with national identity.
Right.
It creates this sense of belonging and solidarity based on shared faith and ethnicity.
So it's like your religion is tied to your nationality.
Exactly. And it can be a very powerful force for political mobilization.
Especially in places where religious minorities feel marginalized or threatened.
Right, because it creates this sense of us versus them.
Which can be very dangerous.
Yes, it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
On the one hand, it can foster a strong sense of community and shared purpose.
But on the other hand,
It can be used to justify discrimination and violence against those who are perceived as different.
we've seen this happen time and time again throughout history.
Unfortunately, yes.
And we're still seeing it play out in various parts of the world today.
Often with tragic consequences.
It's a reminder that the study of international relations is not just about abstract theories.
It's about understanding the real-world impact of these forces.
It's about people's lives.
And understanding these dynamics of religious nationalism can help us anticipate and mitigate potential conflicts.
And hopefully promote peaceful coexistence between different religious and ethnic groups.
That's the goal.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right, so we've covered social conservatism and ethnic nationalism.
Okay.
Now let's delve into that third way. Religion is being used politically,
Theocratic politics.
which seems particularly relevant to the example of Iran that we talked about earlier.
Yes, Iran is a prime example of a theocracy.
A system of government where religious leaders hold ultimate authority.
And religious law is the foundation of the legal system.
It's a fascinating concept.
It is.
And for those of us who are used to secular democracies, it can be a bit mind-boggling to think about a country where religious principles are so deeply intertwined with political power.
But as you mentioned earlier, it presents a unique challenge for international relations.
Because how do you engage diplomatically with a state whose political system is based on a set of religious beliefs that may be vastly different from your own?
It's a question that diplomats and policymakers are grappling with.
And it brings us back to that idea of the secularization thesis being challenged.
Right.
Because if we look at Iran, it's clear that religion isn't simply fading away in the face of modernization.
It's adapting
Evolving
and finding new ways to assert its influence in the 21st century.
And this is a trend that we're seeing reflected in different ways across the globe.
Religion is not going anywhere.
It's not.
In fact, it's becoming increasingly important to understand its role in shaping political landscapes,
Influencing social movements.
driving global events.
It's like we've added a whole new layer of complexity.
To this already intricate tapestry of international relations.
And for those of you prepping for the UPSC, this is crucial knowledge.
You need to understand these dynamics.
The world is changing.
And understanding the interplay of religion and politics is essential for navigating the challenges and opportunities of the 21st century.
Couldn't agree more. So we've laid the groundwork here.
Yes.
We've explored the resurgence of religion and politics and its various manifestations.
But the big question remains.
What does this all mean for the future of international relations?
That's what we'll be exploring in part 2 of this deep dive.
We'll delve deeper into the implications of this resurgence, examining its impact on everything from global conflicts to international development to the future of democracy itself.
So stay tuned.
Because things are about to get really interesting.
They are.
And we're back for part 2 of our deep dive into the resurgence of religion in politics. Before the break, we were talking about how this trend is really shaking things up on the world stage, challenging those old assumptions about secularization.
Yeah, it's definitely making things more complex, and it's not just about understanding the differences between different religions.
Right. It's about how religion is being used to shape political identities.
Exactly. It's about how it's mobilizing social movements and even redefining national interests.
And for our listeners out there who are prepping for the UPSC, this is seriously important stuff.
Oh, absolutely. This is the kind of analysis that can really set you apart in the IR section.
Imagine being able to bring up those subtle connections between religion and geopolitics in your answers.
It shows a deep understanding of the forces shaping global affairs, and that's what the UPSC examiners are looking for.
So let's get into some of those implications of this resurgence. We've talked about how it's impacting international relations, but how is this playing out in a more concrete way? What are some of the challenges and opportunities that this trend presents?
Well, one of the most significant challenges is definitely the potential for conflict.
Yeah, when religious identities get mixed up with political ambitions, things can get really volatile.
Absolutely. It creates this breeding ground for tensions to escalate, and we see this happening in various regions around the world.
The Middle East, South Asia, parts of Africa, it's like adding fuel to the fire of existing conflicts.
And it's not just about conflict between states.
Right. We're also seeing a rise in conflicts within states, often driven by religious or sectarian divisions.
Exactly. Think about the conflicts in Syria, Iraq, or Yemen.
Religious divisions have played a major role in those conflicts and created these incredibly complex humanitarian crises.
It's a really tragic situation.
It really is. So beyond the immediate impact of conflict, how is this resurgence affecting things like international development and global cooperation?
That's a really important question because religion can actually be a very powerful force for social change and development.
Oh, so it's not all doom and gloom.
Not at all. Faith-based organizations often play a crucial role in providing humanitarian aid, promoting education, advocating for social justice.
So there's potential for positive change as well?
Definitely, religion can be a powerful motivator for people to work for the common good.
To care for others, to build bridges across divides.
Exactly. But we also have to be aware of the potential downsides.
What kind of downsides are we talking about?
Well, sometimes religious values can clash with development goals.
Okay, I see what you mean.
For example, certain religious beliefs about gender roles or family planning can complicate efforts to promote women's empowerment or provide access to reproductive health care.
That's a really important point. It's a reminder that we can't just impose our own values on other cultures.
We need to be sensitive to those local beliefs and traditions.
While also promoting those universal values like human rights and equality.
Exactly. It requires a nuanced approach.
Okay, so we've talked about the potential for conflict and the complexities of international development. What about the bigger picture? The implications for global governance. Is this resurgence of religion challenging the existing world order?
It's definitely raising some big questions about the future of global governance. The current international system is largely based on secular principles and institutions.
Right. But as religion becomes more prominent in domestic politics, it's going to spill over into the international arena.
It has to.
So what does that mean in practice? Are we going to see this clash between religious and secular values in international forums?
It's definitely a possibility.
I can see that happening.
We're already seeing debates around issues like human rights and religious freedom where different cultural and religious perspectives are coming into play.
It's like those fault lines are becoming more visible.
But it doesn't have to be a clash of civilizations.
So you're saying there's still room for dialogue and cooperation?
Absolutely. It's about finding ways to engage constructively with different worldviews and building bridges across those cultural and religious divides.
Which is easier said than done sometimes.
It's definitely a challenge, but I think it's an essential one. We need to remember that religion is a complex and multifaceted phenomenon.
It's not just good or bad, it's both.
Exactly. It can be a source of division and conflict, but it can also be a force for peace, justice, and compassion.
Like we've been saying throughout this deep dive, there are no simple answers when it comes to religion and politics. It's all about nuanced understanding and navigating these complexities with care.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And this brings us to another crucial aspect of this resurgence, its impact on democracy itself. As religious groups become more politically active, they're raising questions about the role of religion in public life and those boundaries between church and state.
That's a really interesting point. In many secular democracies, there's this clear separation between religion and politics. But as religious beliefs become more central to political identities, are those boundaries starting to blur?
It's a debate that's happening in many countries around the world.
I can imagine.
Some argue that increasing religious influence in politics threatens the very foundations of democracy.
While others argue that religious values can actually enrich public discourse.
And contribute to a more just and compassionate society.
It's a complex issue with no easy answers. But it's one that we need to be thinking about as we grapple with the implications of this religious resurgence.
Absolutely. And for our UPSC aspirants, this is a key area to focus on. Understanding the relationship between religion, democracy, and international relations is crucial for making sense of the changing global landscape.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here, exploring the challenges, opportunities, and broader implications of this religious resurgence. But there's one question that keeps coming back to me. Is this a temporary trend, or are we witnessing a fundamental shift in the way religion and politics interact on a global scale?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And unfortunately, we don't have a crystal ball.
If only.
But what's clear is that religion is reasserting itself as a major force in global affairs.
And that has profound implications for how we understand the world, how we conduct diplomacy, and how we address the challenges facing humanity in the 21st century.
Exactly. It's a reminder that we need to be constantly learning, adapting, and expanding our understanding of the world.
And that's what makes the study of international relations so fascinating. It's like we're piecing together this giant puzzle, and religion is one of those pieces we can no longer ignore.
Well said. And for those of you listening, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep learning. Because in a world where the only constant is change, the ability to adapt and evolve is our greatest asset.
And with that, we'll wrap up part 2 of this deep dive. But don't go anywhere, because in part 3, we'll be tackling the big question. What does the future hold for the relationship between religion and politics? Will this resurgence continue, or are there counterforces at play?
We'll be back after a short break to explore those questions and more. Stay tuned.
All right, we're back for the final part of our deep dive into the resurgence of religion in politics. We've talked about the challenges, the opportunities, those really complex dynamics of religious nationalism.
And how faith-based initiatives are playing a role in international development. It's been quite a journey.
It really has, and we've seen how this resurgence is changing the world in some pretty profound ways. I mean, it's impacting international relations, the future of democracy, you name it.
But the big question now is, what does the future hold?
Right. Is this a temporary thing, or are we seeing a fundamental shift in how religion and politics are interacting on a global scale?
That's the question that everyone's asking, scholars, policymakers, even everyday people.
Yeah, everyone's trying to figure this out.
And while we don't have all the answers,
Right, no crystal ball.
we can look at some trends, some potential scenarios, and get a sense of what might be coming down the road.
Okay, so let's do a little future casting. What are some of the things that could shape the relationship between religion and politics in the years to come?
Well, one thing to consider is population growth.
Okay, how so?
Well, the global population is growing, and especially in regions where religion is a big part of society. As those populations grow, their political influence is going to grow too.
Makes sense. More people means more voters, more activists, more voices that need to be heard.
Exactly. And if those voices are rooted in religious values, it's bound to have an impact.
And we can't forget about technology either. I mean, the internet and social media have given religious groups new ways to express themselves, to organize, to even radicalize.
It's a double-edged sword, really.
Oh, absolutely.
On the one hand, technology can connect people across borders. It can foster dialogue between different faiths, but it can also be used to spread extremist ideologies.
Yeah, and to incite violence.
Exactly, which is why digital literacy and critical thinking are more important than ever.
Couldn't agree more, especially for those UPSC aspirants out there. Being able to cut through the noise and analyze information critically is key.
It's not just about memorizing facts, it's about thinking for yourself.
So we've got population growth, technology. What else should we be keeping an eye on?
Well, we can't ignore the impact of climate change.
Climate change, okay.
It's an issue that raises a lot of moral and ethical questions, questions about social justice, all themes that are central to many religious beliefs.
So you're saying climate change could actually push religion further into the political sphere?
It's possible. As the impacts of climate change become more severe, people are going to be looking for answers, for solutions, for some kind of hope.
And for many people, their faith is where they turn in times of crisis.
Exactly. And this could lead to a surge in activism around climate change, with religious groups demanding action from governments and corporations.
We're already seeing some of that happening. I mean, faith leaders are speaking out about the moral imperative to protect the planet.
It's a growing movement.
It's interesting to think about how this could play out on a global scale. Could we actually see religious values driving international climate agreements?
It's not out of the question. I mean, history is full of examples of religious beliefs shaping social and political movements.
Abolition of slavery, The fight for civil rights?
Exactly. Religion can be a powerful force for change.
It can be a force for good or for bad.
And understanding how it interacts with issues like climate change is crucial for navigating the 21st century.
So for our listeners out there, and especially those prepping for the UPSC, start thinking about these scenarios. How might this resurgence of religion shape the future of international relations? What about global governance, conflict resolution, human rights?
These are the questions that matter.
We've given you the tools and the insights. Now it's up to you to use them.
Analyze the world around you, make sense of what's happening, and form your own informed opinions.
The world needs more people who can think critically and engage with these complex issues. So as we wrap up this deep dive, remember to stay curious, stay engaged, and never stop learning.
The world needs more informed and compassionate citizens, especially now. And for those of you preparing for the UPSC, best of luck on your journey. Knowledge is power, and critical thinking is your greatest asset.
Couldn't have said it better myself. That's a wrap on another episode of The Deep Dive. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this with anyone who's interested in exploring the world of religion and global politics. Until next time, keep those minds curious.